left-communism. And, when we talk about our left-wing factions on the left, lefting it up, we may know our social democrats. We may know our democratic socialists. We may know our Marxist Leninists, let's use their preferred noun. And of course, we also know the Trots. But what are left comms? Are they anarchists? Are they communists? Who are they? Left communism is an interesting trend in socialism, which I think is probably quite misunderstood, or at least people don't know much about it because it did not have any of the leaders of the Bolshevik party involved in it. It didn't have a great, parliamentary representation like the Social Democrats. There's kind of this uh, curious trend in communism, which is often mistaken for anarchism. And to discuss this with me, I have someone I would describe as, I don't know, left-com-ish, left-com adjacent, left-com orientated, the one, the only, Sean KP from the Antifada. Welcome to This is Revolution.
Hello, it's great to be back. It's been what, a couple months since we've done this? Couple
It's
few
been,
months?
it is. It has been a few months, but it's always good to have you on. And hopefully, we will be joined by C. Derek Vaughan later. He just sent me a message saying that he's busy recording his 50th episode of Vaughan Vlog.
Oh my God, that man is prolific. We were just
He's
talking about before, where does he find time to sleep?
Well, my theory is, of course, he's got like a stash of Panzer Chocolate. That stuff can get you to drive from, the Belgian border to the English Channel in a day. So I,
Perhaps Utah's the one state in this country where there isn't a deficit of attention drugs out there.
that's true. That's true. A good one. So yeah, well, I wanted to talk to you because we have you on. Jason has tried to get you to say the N word on camera several times.
I once did call American craft trade unions inward looking.
Yeah.
And of course, Jason Miles, because he's a wonderful comedian, thought that or joked that I said N word looking unions. And it was probably the most and hardest I've ever laughed on a podcast in my entire life.
I was listening, and I have to say, it did sound like you were saying N-word looking. I mean, like, take a moment to think about all the.
Buddy, you froze on my end. I know that Gene was talking about before we started that he has something called Ozarks Internet. And I think that perhaps he's
Oh,
got a case of the Ozarks. What's up, man? We
yeah,
lost
the
you for a sec.
the Ozarks, the Ozarks internet just hit me. I have no idea what's going on with this Ozarks internet. Well, what I was going to say is, I feel sorry for the poor Iranian and Turkish girls who have the name Nigar, which obviously would be quite unfortunate to
I
to
feel
try and explain to people. I mean, I
yeah.
get it if you come from Iran and your name is Nigar, but like people who are naming in the Iranian diaspora who are naming their kids Nigar, it's like you're just asking for it.
Yeah, I think it's like naming your child Adolf in like 1946 in the United States. Like I'm pretty sure that it's still a German name, but there's absolutely no reason to like bring that to the US,
Oh, so you're going to criticize Adolf Reed on TIR, huh?
man. He was named after his father, another
That's
Adolf.
true. That's true. That's true. So let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah, let's do it.
What the heck is left communism from your understanding? Obviously, there are political parties, and I want to emphasize you're not affiliated with any particular political party. But the critical point I want to make is, what is this trend, and where does it come from?
That's a great question, and it's an expansive question. I'm not actually of the communist left, as they call themselves, because one of the great platforms that people, including Lenin, criticized Western left communist Marxists for is, Lenin criticized them for not integrating and agitating and organizing within capitalist unions, right? There were people arguing that in the West you needed to have like communist only workers unions. And I just got back tonight from my union meeting, and it sure as fuck is not a left communist union. The building trades has absolutely zero of those in New York City. So you know that I'm not of that ilk, because I'm not doing the praxis, you know. But what is it? I mean, that's a great question. I sent you, I think, a link
Hmm.
to a podcast episode that I did on this several years ago, because we had mentioned on the Antifada many times this kind of amorphous concept of left communism, or the communist left. And over people kept saying, like, what the fuck is this? You have to explain this. You know, aren't communists leftists already? What does it mean to be on the left wing of communism? Does that just make you an anarchist or whatever? So I presented, I take a topic very seriously when I actually like write stuff down and read it off on the podcast. And I presented my case from my historical understanding of what this tendency is. And I think through the course of this episode, we can talk about what relevance people and practice and parties and groups from literally over 100 years ago at this point in time, how relevant those are to some sort of revolutionary practice today. And that's an open question to me. But when we're talking about what is left com, and again, like you said, in the intro, it's something that gets passed around a lot online. You'll hear people either self-applying that they're left communists, or you'll see it as like a slur for people who are revisionist from whatever it is that they're meant to be revising, whether it's Marxism Leninism or Marxism Leninism Maoism. Left com tends to be used as like a derogatory often, because it's considered like a fringe political tendency, which it kind of always has been, and it kind of is by definition. But that's not to say that there aren't valuable lessons within it. So if I were to call myself I would only call myself a left com if I was in one of the left communist parties, internationalist parties that still exist, like the International Communist Party or the International Communist Current. At that point in time, I'd be an official one. But
I think that's an important point to make, because this is something that Jason talks a lot about on this podcast, is warning against the idea of political labels as a kind of self-identification and lifestyle brand.
yeah,
I don't really go around calling myself a communist or a socialist, even in that, and I certainly don't start applying uh, sort of very sort of specific political titles to myself, or trying to perhaps steal the valor of that, because I'm not in any political party. But I think there's a lot of people, and you know what? To be fair to them, if you're like a guy on Twitter who's actually in the CPUSA calling yourself a Marxist Leninist, fair enough.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
but there's a lot of people out there who are just like throwing labels out as a kind of self-identification. And
yeah,
leftcom, obviously, some people, pick that one, up as being like, I'm more left than the left. But it's more than just, it's more than just like trying to left posture. It's a political tradition. And I
yeah.
think what you mentioned at the outset, about, this is a tendency from, 100 a century ago. Is it still relevant today? I mean, I would respond to that by saying, well, given that the Soviet Union has collapsed,
Mm.
we might ask ourselves how relevant, Marxist Leninism is today. I know people will look towards China and Vietnam, but they're following their own very distinct path of development. Whether you want to call that socialism or not, it seems to have relatively little to do with the kind of central planning that was seen in the Soviet Union. And again, with the Trotskyists, it's like, well, the Soviet Union's gone. Does the Trotskyist critique really matter anymore?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's there's a few threads I want to pick up. The first is Trotskyism, because people will often ask, are left communists Trotskyists and vice versa, and they're not. And we can talk about the distinction. But then you mentioned like purity. Essentially, a lot of what people think when they think, if they know anything about left comms, they think of like communist purists or Marxist purists, people who are like too pure for the world. The old joke of like armchair left comms, because all they do is they sit and they critique and they take a distance from the struggle and simply point out all the ways that people aren't doing things perfectly by what Marx or whoever said. And I think there's a real reason for that. But let's get into the heart of the matter, right? So what is this tendency? Um, Basically, you had the Second International, which falls apart spectacularly, of course, with the socialist parties of the Second International voting, most stunningly, France and Germany voting for war credits, basically putting lie to the whole conception of internationalism, the whole concept within the Second International leading up to the First World War was that the proletarian parties would refuse to engage, to support, to enlist, or fund an inter-imperialist war. I mean, this falls apart, and we know what the obvious consequences of that are. It's a huge meat grinder. 10 million people, soldiers are killed in it. Absolute devastation across Europe. But as we know, what comes out of this chaos, and out of this fall of various empires towards the end and at the end of the war, is the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Very quickly, right? Um, the various different tendencies, the Zimmerwald left, the members of the party intellectuals and the workers who were engaged in the Second International but did not support the war, immediately started to reconstitute themselves. And when 1917 happens, when Lenin stands up, and when the workers and soldiers' deputies overthrow the Tsar, you have immediately like a rush towards trying to understand and support the October Revolution as it unfolds. The issue that Lenin and the rest of the party faced was that they were in somewhat uncharted waters. Always theoretically and programmatically, the communist revolution was meant to happen in the advanced capitalist countries. So having an overthrow of the czarist autocratic state, and having a move towards democracy that also, because of the leading role of the proletariat and the Bolshevik Party and the Menshevik Party and the Social Revolutionary Party, all of a sudden now there was this big question: do you go for bourgeois democracy, as was supposed to happen within this stagist conception of modes of production and history, or is it possible to have a democratic and socialist revolution, to kind of jump past and immediately to try to begin to build socialism at this beachhead, right, in Russia? And so in this moment of ferment, and this moment is really between, let's say, 1917 and 1928, as the revolution is ascendant, as the Civil War goes on, as various different means of trying to figure out how to maintain proletarian power, working class power, how to maintain relations between the vast minority of people, of the masses within Russia who were workers, proletarians in urban areas, versus the vast mass of peasantry, tens of millions of peasants who wanted land reform, they wanted peace, but didn't necessarily want what the working class wanted. In this ferment, of course, Lenin is the leading light, not just theoretically, but practically. Lenin is the one who really pushes the revolution forward. And the Bolshevik Party ends up having a central coordinating role within the revolution, which is really a combination of a mass effort, organized effort by the peasantry on the one hand, and by the workers in the Workers' Council in the other. Where does left communism comes from? Is that immediately there start to be debates and arguments about what the role of the party is now that socialism has begun to be established in one backwards country. What's the role of the party? What's the role of the working class itself? What's the relationship of power between this sort of the brain of the revolution within the party, and the body and the organs of it within the workers' councils and the organized working class? And you have a very fraught period of about 10 years, especially as the German Revolution It's hard to say it fails. Workers' councils pop up in 1918 towards the end of the
But
First World War, and there's mutinies.
the Social Democratic Party, and I think the debate that we have amongst the left generally focuses on this split between the Bolsheviks and the Social Democrats, where you have Kautsky spending the rest of his life attacking the Bolsheviks, and the Second International reconstituting itself, and the Social Democrats in Germany collaborating with the German military to repress the communists.
Yeah.
One of the little things I like to note is, like, when people go, well, the German Communist Party were like not trusting the Social Democrats with the rise of Hitler. I mean, maybe they should have worked with them. I'm not going to be a strategist on this, but like, let's not forget that like a lot of the leadership of the communist movement was executed by a social democratic government. So that's where we usually focus our discussion on, like, socialism versus communism, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're gonna point out here, just as the Bolshevik Revolution sort of, let's say, clarified this divide between reformism and socialism as the management of capitalism, and socialism as something to try and chart some kind of new system. It also kind of gave birth to this left-com critique. So the left-com critique comes out of the experience of the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, the left, this is an important thing to note, is that the left communist critique, which arises pretty early, by like 1918, 1919, is one that's based not simply on theories trying to like apply the perfect blueprint laid down by Marx or Engels or even Lenin for that matter. It's about various phases and various circumstances within this revolutionary situation where the working class and the peasantry, the working masses, had finally conquered power. And the questions were, again, how does the organized party relate to the masses? What sort of modes of self-governance, what self-management and self-control, what kind of control is there over production, and who does it? And importantly, too, what is the relationship between this isolated revolution in a backwards part of Eastern Europe and the rest of the scattered communist forces that exist, and the socialist forces which may potentially be brought on board? And so the left communism as a tendency, again, doesn't arise out of mere theory. It arises out of conflicts and debates that are happening at the time of this revolutionary upsurge, in the time of a civil war, when you've got you got a dozen foreign nations invading Russia, trying to stamp out the revolution. You've got the Western European powers funding massive, like, proto-fascist armies, essentially, of old white generals trying to overthrow this revolution. It happens amidst a serious breakdown of the entire Russian economy, because you have a very, I wouldn't say spontaneous, but certainly a very quick socialization, not collectivization, but land reform in the countryside, which all of a sudden, like, this ancient train of landlordism and parasitism and rentierism that took place under Tsarist autocracy, all of a sudden collapses, and you have this massive upsurge of peasants, while in the cities you have this very weak and nascent capitalist class that had been running rather large factories, munitions, and some advanced machinery, all of a sudden either flee or go into hiding. The engineers and managers who had been running these factories in Russia on behalf of either domestic or foreign capital, the managers and engineers all of a sudden disappear too. And while the workers, of course, had a general sense of how to run the machinery, it's what they did day in and day out, you had a real lack of expertise. And you also had, because of this intense civil war situation, like a whole social crisis, a whole violent upheaval that you're trying to work out, the economy behind. So you have a period of war communism, it's called.
And this comes on top of, let's not forget, 3 years of the Tsarist regime participating in the war. So the societies exhausted. And so, the Bolsheviks, when taking power, are, you know, quite understandably taking quite what we might call authoritarian measures
Hmm.
to keep the train running. This is 1920s, I think, when Trotsky writes Revolution and Terrorism, no, Communism and Terrorism,
Hmm.
which is a reply to Kautsky, and also was, interestingly enough, one of Stalin's favorite books.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, so it's a society in crisis where extraordinary means are being implemented to keep society going, just the basic infrastructure of society. They're building an army from scratch. They're fighting these things, these civil wars. And also the Bolsheviks are focusing on trying to keep their working class base in the towns fed and supplies coming to them, because
Yeah.
that's their praxis. It's like, we have to look after the workers, even if that means like forcibly requisitioning grain from the peasantry.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the actual like mechanism by which dual power was achieved in the Soviet Union, what becomes the Soviet Union, which are the Soviets, which are the workers' councils. This is a form of mass organization that arises also in Russia in the 1905 revolution, where it's essentially, if you can imagine, this is how Panakok, who's a council communist in the left communist tradition, talks about it. If you can imagine like a strike committee, right, in a factory or across an industry, has to make various different, it has to have meetings to pull people together. It has to have all the workers together and not cross the line. It has to, if it's going to be in a revolutionary situation, continue production in some sort of way. But the way that the workers' councils develop in this revolutionary situation is like a fascinating form of sort of like a collapsing of the political and the economic, this distinction within capitalism, where you have politics here, where you elect somebody and they go up and they claim to represent your interests for 2 to 4 to 6 years or whatever. And then you have the economy, which is this sort of like natural, this naturalized sort of like almost like force of nature
Mm-hmm.
itself, And so what the workers' councils did was basically these mass strike committees become like these representative democratic organs of the workers, where it's not merely the political question of, are we going to have a constituent assembly? Are we going to create a bourgeois democracy? Where are we going to find a bourgeoisie for that? We're not really sure, right? It's not just political questions, but also economic, what we would call economic questions, also get resolved down into these bodies. And so this is the state that the Bolsheviks found themselves in and found the working class in, which was highly organized in these democratic assemblies that basically were a dual power versus the constituent assembly, which is the political aspect of the initial revolution. And so the workers' councils, as this revolutionary form, become one of the hallmarks of left communism, or at least one half of left communism, is seeing the workers' councils, the Soviets themselves, in their form and in their content, as the overcoming of capitalist social relations, and more than just like in a formalistic sense. The USSR has Soviets in the name, right? More than like a formalistic sense, actually the expression of the creativity and the initiative of the working class, and the ability for the working class to self-organize and self-govern itself. So